I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 20th, 2024. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lynn Timmers, Councillor and Chair of the General Business and Finance Committee. I'd like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see the deputy clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, please ensure your cell phone is on silent or turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Committee of the Whole meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed caption is available on all of our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of your video. Under roll call, members of committee are in attendance, in person and remotely, with regrets from Councillor Russell. Councillor Mikulik will be arriving later this evening. We have staff in attendance, in person and remotely. Additionally, we have Byron Tan from Watson and Associates, economists, in attendance. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? Thank you. We have one statutory public meeting this evening. The purpose of a public meeting is to provide background information, receive comments from the public, and consider questions regarding the proposed development charge background study and development charge bylaw, which will address legislative changes to the Development Charges Act. We will consider the report associated with the item immediately after the statutory public meeting. Committee must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand the proposal being considered, and committee must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and may be contained in Appendix to a staff report published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or the minutes of the public meeting, and may be part of the public record. The Town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of committee's decisions. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Our public meeting is for the development charge review, and our Chief Administrative Officer will provide some introductory comments. Please go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of council, those listening here in the chamber this evening, and anyone online as well. I want to welcome Byron from the team at Watson, not a stranger to this council, but leading this evening. So welcome, Byron, and also Kathleen, who's, I describe it, sort of come out of retirement on this one project to help us in terms of information gathering. I do also want to highlight that this evening's presentation follows a meeting with stakeholders that we had last week with significant attendance. Just a little bit of background before I hand it over to Byron. This development charge bylaw and background study process has included a variety of factors from different pieces of provincial legislation. These include a lot of the changes that you're aware about and that we've presented on, changes to exemptions, items like phase-in, and the overall administration, which will be laid out for you this evening. These are all pressures and influence the DCs of all municipalities. Some have just put in place their DC bylaw prior to those changes, and therefore there's time prior to expiry of their bylaw before some of these changes affect their rates. As we told council last time we were in front of you, Lincoln was one of those that led at the time, 5 years ago, in putting our DC bylaw in place. And as a result, we find ourselves set to expire on April of 2024. and are required to undertake this process by legislation. As such, many of the trends and influences Council will hear about tonight are going to be consistent factors for all municipalities as they all move forward with their DC studies. Here in Niagara, again, Lincoln is one of the first to move forward. The process that we've gone through has been a number of months. It includes the assembly of a large amount of data from staff in multiple departments to ensure that growth-related costs are adequately identified with the continued goal of growth paying for growth to the greatest extent possible. Notwithstanding that, some of the legislation that recently has been put in place does impact that ability to do so. And so, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Byron to take you through this evening's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. CAO. Just before you begin, Byron, if I could just have a show of hands to extend the time for the presentation.
I'll just get the ones online. Sorry, can you take that down? Councillor Regima and Patrieva, thank you. I see your hands. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, thank you very much. So we now have a presentation from Byron Tan of Watson and Associates Economists. Byron, please go ahead.
Good evening, and thank you very much for that introduction. I'm happy to be here. As mentioned, my name is Byron Tan. I'm a manager at Watson and Associates and was the project lead for the Town of Lincoln's 2023 Development Charge Background Study. As already described by Mr. Kirkopoulos, we are here today for a mandatory public meeting under the Development Charge Act. So, part of the process for tonight, we've already gone through the opening remarks. I'll walk you through a little bit of the overview of the process, the timelines, and then we'll go through some of the development charges overview. Some of it you may have seen before back when we were undertaking the council workshop back in December with my colleague Gary Scanlon. So some of the information here should be more of a refresher, but again, this is more for the public benefit as well through this public meeting process. And then finally, we'll go through the proposed policies, the draft, the calculated rates, and then we'll provide you with a little bit of a sampling of other municipalities and their development charges across the Niagara region. And then any questions from council or the public. So with that being said, as I mentioned, the public meeting is a mandatory process under the Development Charge Act. We are here today to present the findings of the study, which has been an undertaking over the past year and a half. We worked with staff all through 2023 and into the beginning of 2024 to compile a lot of the information that was seen within the background study. This included a review of your existing service standards, existing assets, growth forecasts, policies, and obviously the capital infrastructure that is required to meet the growth needs within the town. As such, we are undertaking this study in compliance to the Act. We released the study back in December. There is a mandatory period that the study must be released prior to Council's consideration of the bylaw, which is a minimum of 60 days. Given that we released the study back in December, you'll see in the following slide that we are considering the bylaw in April. So with that being said, we are more than exceeding that 60-day requirement. So as you can see on the timelines, we started at the beginning of 2023, again, meeting with staff on the calculations, policy review, growth forecasts, and that all came to compile into a document that was released on December 22nd. Since that time, there were a couple of items that were essentially re-examined into the new year with respect to some of your water and wastewater projects. Those have been documented, and actually we have done an addendum to that background study, and which was released on February 9th. I'll talk about that in a moment in a later slide. Now, obviously, through this process, historically we have always engaged with the stakeholder and development community. We've done that as well today, during this process. So on February 14th of 2024, we met with the development group and presented essentially the same information that you are receiving today. So they are apprised of all of the data and as well as the background study as being presented in front of council. And obviously, we're here today on the February 20th public meeting, and we are looking to have the consideration of the bylaw in advance of your expiry date on April 15th. So with that being said, development charges, they're not new. The purpose of it is to recover for growth-related capital costs with respect to residential and non-residential developments. And these capital costs would be in addition to what you would require from a local subdivision or any local agreements where developers would need to construct more localized works such as local water mains, local sewers, roads, sidewalks, etc. The municipalities, you're not forced to undertake a development charge study or a development charge bylaw, but you do have these tools in order to assist with revenue generating, towards these growth-related capital assets. One of the changes that were revised to the Development Charge Act back in 2021 during Bill 197 was the listing of eligible services that we could collect for under the DCA and under your DC bylaw. As you can see, the listing has been narrowed to about 20 services, of which one, namely housing services, was eliminated from Bill 23, which I'll talk about shortly after. So really, we're down to 19 services that could be collected or considered under a development charge bylaw. For the town of Lincoln, those are narrowed to the ones in teal that you see on the screen. So during this study process, we've taken a look at water, wastewater, storm, services related to highway, which includes your roads, related public works, vehicles, fleet, etc., fire protection services, library services, and parks and recreation. Just a quick recap on the legislative overview. You may have seen this before already, but for the benefit of the public, there were a number of changes to the Development Charge Act over recent years. Since your 2018 DC study, actually, we did undertake a 2022 DC update to incorporate a number of these changes that came about through the Development Charge Act. And you'll see those on the screen with Bill 108, 138, 197, and 213. Now, I understand these bill numbers are recycled, but it just saves some time instead of reading the acts in its entirety for each and every one. So these bills and the legislation that came with it, was already incorporated as part of your 2022 DC update. However, since the completion of that study, there have been further legislative changes that took place through the Development Charge Act. And that was through, as most of you know, Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, and then Bill 134, which was the Affordable Homes and Goods Jobs Act. And those deserve slides on their own. With respect to Bill 23, the province did pass this bill in November 28, 2022. It was actually first tabled on October 25th, the prior month. So within basically a month and 3-4 days, it received royal assent. The bill made a number of changes to the Development Charge Act, Planning Act, as well as 7 other pieces of legislation. But obviously, most notably for the development charge study process, what we're looking at here are the impacts to the DC Development Charge Act. So with that being said, there were a number of items from Bill 23 that negatively impact the amount of revenues that a municipality can collect for at the end of the day. And I've summarized those on the next slides. So with respect to Bill 23 and, with Bill 134, I'll start off with the bottom first because these exemptions are currently in force. So what you'll see in the green here, these additional exemptions have been included as part of your draft bylaw, and all municipalities now have to adhere to this if you were to receive these type of developments. So in terms of an inclusionary zoning unit, if you had an inclusionary bylaw, zoning bylaw with affordable housing, those would be automatically exempted. Now, that doesn't apply for Lincoln as you do not have that type of development in the area, but again, it is something that we would write within the bylaw. Nonprofit housing, you used to be able to pay over 20 years, 21 installments for nonprofit housing. Now with Bill 23, those payments post November 28, 2022 have all been removed. and any new nonprofit housing would now be exempted from development charges. Now, the nonprofit must meet the criteria and must meet the definition that's within the Development Charge Act. So you always have to look at the definitions to the act to refer to whether those type of units are exempted. And then there was some clarification changes with respect to the additional residential intensification items. So historically, you do provide intensification exemptions with respect to existing homes and new homes. Bill 23 just essentially revise the definition to remove certain criterias. For example, you used to be able to add 2 additional apartments to a single-family home as long as you don't more than double the size of the home. Well, they've removed that last part, so now it's just you can add 2 additional apartments, period. So they had some revisions there, which again, we have documented as part of your draft bylaw as well. And then the next part of the exemptions on the orange are currently not in force. However, we have written them into your bylaw in case the province does release a bulletin to enable these additional exemptions. The first 2 are affordable units, which are owned or rental. Bill 134 actually amended this definition to include a income qualifier. So, whether it's owned or rented, a rented unit, it must demonstrate that the cost or the rent is less than 30% of the 60th percentile of the income of the household in the municipality. Now, we're not sure how that would be defined at this point. We're not sure whether income would be just isolated to Lincoln. Would it be Niagara region? Would it be, certain blocks? I know there are some municipalities that have multiple urban areas like yourselves, and each one is unique in its own way. So to do an averaging amongst, different areas, you may result in one area having all exemptions and other areas not having it, simply because of averaging. So that is something that we are monitoring, and we will keep everyone apprised of any information that may come about from the province. And then with attainable units, these, again, will be defined by the bulletin as prescribed by the province, but these would be units that aren't considered affordable or owned units or rental units. So we're still unclear as to how this will be, put forth. The only definition we have is it's to be sold to a person who's arm's length from the seller. That's it. So again, as the bulletin, if it does, come about, we will keep everyone informed of how to basically apply these exemptions through your development charge bylaw. And lastly, with any exemptions, and especially with these new items, there are transitionary rules. And as such, the municipality shall enter into an agreement with the owners of these said unit types over a period of 25 years to ensure that they remain affordable or attainable. Now, we don't know exactly, what would entail in that agreement, what would be, what would the specifics and criteria be. But that is something, again, we will monitor to see once these are enacted between yourselves as well as your peers that are also undertaking this DC process. Moving on, there are a number of other discounts and reductions due to Bill 23. One of the other ones is the rental housing discount. So there are rental housing discounts depending on the number of bedrooms that are applied. Now again, to be qualified as a rental housing, you must meet the criteria and definition as per the Act, where the whole building has to be purpose-built rental. But the rental essentially says, if you are a 1-bedroom, you get a 15% discount on the DCs. 2-bedroom, you would get a 20% discount, and then 3 bedrooms or more, you get a 25% discount on top of the development charge. So that is something that, the building officials as well as the town would have to monitor to see if, again, those type of discounts apply. And then furthermore, there are additional reductions in revenue. As I mentioned, the removal of housing from the development charge eligible categories. It doesn't impact the town, but the region used to have housing as a DC eligible service. So that has now been removed from their calculations and their bylaw. There are a couple of capital cost amendments. They restricted and removed the inclusion of studies and land. However, with studies, while we have removed, essentially the studies from the DC background report, the land piece has still not been prescribed. So we're still not sure which service for which land is no longer eligible for. So until that comes about, we are still including land within the DC studies until otherwise stated by the province, and they prescribe which services it can no longer apply to. And the largest one is the mandatory phase-in of the DCs. So when you do implement your charge, as soon as you pass your bylaw, beginning day one for a whole year, you must phase in up to 80%, down to 80% of the calculated charge. And that amount can increase every year by 5%. So year two, upon the anniversary date of the bylaw, it goes up to 85, and then 90, 95, 100. Now, you are still able to index the charge annually, so that is something that you are still allowed to do. However, as I mentioned, the mandatory phase-in is impacted immediately, regardless of whether you implement your own phase-in or not. And then the historical level of service, that has just been changed from 10 years to 15 years. While it may not seem like a big deal, some municipalities, depending on how their historical service standards are calculated, that beginning 5 years may impact the development charge ceiling, which is essentially the maximum amount that you can collect from a development charge category, because it is purely mathematical when it comes to the thresholds of what you can collect for all services except for water, wastewater, storm, and transit. Now, I would like to just make a note, especially with respect to the studies and then the mandatory phase-in, that the province did release a news article back in December 13th of 2023, where they will be undertaking a process to review the mandatory phase-in and the eligibility of studies. So with that being said, we haven't heard anything yet as to what the outcome or when that process will start. But if there is any changes at Queen's Park or anything that's released, we will keep staff and the town apprised of any issues that or any documents that are released by the province. And then lastly, on Bill 23, there are some additional administrative items that the town must adhere to. Historically, if you were to enter into agreements for site plan or zoning bylaw amendments, developers were allowed to freeze the DC rate for a period of up to 2 years. Additionally, you were able to also charge interest on those rate freezes. And this interest rate also applies to your annual payments on developments such as, rental housing, institutional, and then as well as that site plan and zoning bylaw, and non-for-profit at the time when it was allowed. And you were able to set your own interest rates. Well, now there is a mandatory prescribed interest rate, which is the average prime rate plus 1% of the large banks. So it is something that is calculated on a quarterly basis. So that is something that we do track as well and provide to staff in the town. But you can no longer use your own interest rates unless, of course, it's lower than the maximum interest rate that is implemented by the Development Charge Act. And then there's a requirement to allocate 60% of the monies, in the reserve funds for water, wastewater, and services related to highway. It doesn't mean you have to spend the money, but at the beginning of the year, when the treasurer is undertaking the treasurer statements, we just have to ensure that any collections under these three categories, 60% of those funds are at least earmarked for future projects. Doesn't have to be the project that's happening currently or even in subsequent years. It could be a project that's, in 10, 20 years. There's no prescribed method of how to allocate, but it is something that must be included as part of those statements. And then the bylaw expires 10 years instead of 5. But what we have noticed is, especially even this past 5-year period through COVID, indexing has not been keeping up with the cost of actual tenders and estimates. So it may be prudent for some municipalities to monitor the type of construction and tenders that you're receiving from your contractors to see if the increases are still keeping up with the inflationary factors. So with that being said, just want to provide a quick overview of how we calculate the development charges. Again, these are broken down into 6 steps. The DCA has over 80 clauses and hundreds of sub-clauses, so we tried to narrow it down into a more palatable, methodology here. But essentially, we identify the amount, type, and location of growth. So that's where we undertake the work with the planning staff and the rest of the town staff to take a look at your growth forecasts, over a set period of time. And then from there, we then determine the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. Further, then we identify the capital costs to provide those services. So while 2 and 3 sound familiar, or similar, I should say, number 2 says, I need parks and recreation services, or I need, roads services. Number 3 then identifies the specific project to meet that. So for example, if you need additional, parks recreation programming, it can be in the form of, an expansion to an arena. It can be in the form of, an artificial turf, playground, whatever project you need to meet the programming demand, right? So, number 3 just meets the needs of number 2, which is the servicing needs. And then once we identify the costs, we have a number of deductions we must adhere to. Grants, subsidies, other contributions, pretty few and far in between, but if you do have any grants, we do have to deduct it from the costs. We also do a benefit to existing calculation where we examine the particular projects relative to the benefit to the existing community. And then we also deduct that amount in excess of that service standard calculation. So if you recall, when we do the mathematics behind it, there's a cap for certain services. We can't exceed that cap. So there's another deduction there if we go over. And then from one bylaw to the other, if you've over-collected, or, if you have collected the funds but haven't spent on the projects yet, and you have reserve fund revenues in the bank, we would apply that to the capital as a deduction. But the opposite is also true, where if you funded things ahead of schedule and now you have reserve fund deficits, we can then include those deficits as a collection to pay yourselves back, because you may have cash flowed it from other sources. So once we get those costs, we then allocate it between residential and non-residential benefit. And then simply, once those are separated into those 2 categories, we then divide it by the growth forecast in those particular categories. So just as a brief overview of the calculations, we identify the cost of infrastructure required to accommodate growth, and we divide it again by res and non-res growth to get you a charge which is typically on a per unit basis for residential developments. So singles, multiples, such as townhouses or apartments, 2-bedroom or more, 1-bedroom or less. And then we also have your charge per square foot for non-residential. And it's typically translated on a per square foot or per square meter basis, because then you can clearly see, the footprint that's being developed and utilization for the town. As I mentioned, there's a number of exemptions, that you must provide. So while DCs are there to help provide revenues, it's not full cost recovery. At the end of the day, you're probably looking at, maybe 60 to 70% recovery of your inventory and of your capital that you've identified due to all these exemptions and reductions. So, there's a number of exemptions that you must adhere to that are mandatory. You have the upper and lower tier governments and school boards. So if Niagara built a building, you don't charge them a DC. Likewise, if you built a building, they don't charge you a regional DC. Industrial building expansions, they can expand their current footprint up to 50% without having to pay a DC. Now, we do write in the bylaw it's a one-time expansion and there's a cutoff, so then that way it doesn't get abused and, someone doesn't come in with a 50,000 expansion, next year comes with a 75, and then, in perpetuity. We also have the development of lands on university lands that receive operating funding from the government. So those type of lands and any developments on them are exempt. And then we have all the intensification exemptions, as I mentioned, in addition to the Bill 23 exemptions that you're seeing on the screen in orange. With respect to discretionary exemptions, you are allowed to reduce the DC in whole or in part. You could do it by class or by type. So you could elect to eliminate the development charge, let's say, for primary and agricultural, which I believe you do. And then you could also reduce certain categories as well, whether it's commercial, industrial, institutional, or even residential for that matter. Council has the ability to do so. You may phase in the charge over time. However, Bill 23 has mandatorily made that as part of your process. But if you feel that you want to phase in even more than just the 80%, you have the ability to do so. And you have to provide redevelopment credits. So at this point in time, if, let's say, my house burnt down, knock on wood, hopefully it doesn't, I should be allowed a period of time to rebuild it without having to pay a DC. Likewise, if I am, buying 3 blocks of single detached homes and knocking them down and building a plaza of commercial, then I should get a credit for those 3 homes because they had capacity that they were utilizing and just pay the difference between what's there currently versus what I'm proposing to build. And just to make a note that any exemptions that are either applied or provided need to be funded back into the reserve funds in order to ensure that you have the money available to actually construct the capital that you've identified through your background study. Some of the existing discretionary exemptions that we have provided from the previous study, which are proposed to be continued. Places of worship, non-residential farm buildings, farm help houses, garden suites, parking structures, elevators, temporary uses, and canopies, including gas station canopies. There are also these items called a local service policy. So as part of the background study, we also include a local service policy which identifies what would be the developer's responsibility at a localized subdivision versus what would be included in the DC. So this is to help, assist staff as well as ourselves to be able to delineate, who's responsible for which projects. So this is something that we have undertaken in very detailed accounts back in 2018, 2019. Through working with staff in the development community, it appears that the local service policy is performing well. So at this point in time, we've made no changes to your current local service policy. So just to provide you with a little bit of perspective, which I'm sure council knows, but the relationship with development charges and new growth, as I said, development charges are not mandatory. They don't need to be here. However, if you do have services for new growth, if you do have new users, you have to provide new services. And if you don't have development charges, then really the monies will have to come from rates, taxation, reserves, etc. So so development charges are just meant to help offset some of the costs that would be borne by the existing users and the existing community. With respect to the housing forecast that we utilized in the DC study, we went out a period to 2042, 2043. And the reason for that is a lot of your master plans, as well as a number of capital items through working with staff, that was the most known, at least the last year possible where we can still have a capital program that we are very satisfied to provide to council for their review. So as you can see, the forecast here is looking at approximately 344 units per year. I understand that there are ebbs and flows, and it won't be as a straight line as this, but to be able to try to figure out exactly which years have that maximum of, let's say, 548 kind of historically versus a year that goes down to as low as 34, it would be very difficult to do. So we do have a target, and for the purposes of the calculations, we've just assumed a similar building envelope every year. In terms of the summary, so this looks at it more in numerical form. Over the 10-year forecast, we're looking at an increase of just under 6,200 people, to 2032. And that translates to about 3,600 homes. Again, this is a mix of your singles, townhomes, and apartments. And corresponding non-residential for that is about 584,000 square feet. Fast forward to the 20-year forecast, going out to 2043, we're looking at about 12,500 people over that time horizon, and about 7,200 homes, to house those individuals, and just over 1 million square feet of non-residential GFA. And we also have an urban 20-year. So these calculations are meant to be applied to anyone that has water or wastewater servicing. So that's what you're seeing there where, over the 20-year forecast, of that 7,200, 6,900 homes are anticipated to be connected to your water and wastewater services, which then eventually draws from Niagara region. As I mentioned earlier, the services being included, we have your town-wide services, fire, services related to highway, parks and rec and library, and your urban services, which really are your stormwater, water, and wastewater. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that on February 9th, we did release an addendum to the background study from December, as there were additional, comments from staff upon a further review of the water and wastewater figures. So the purpose of the report was to revise the water capital sheet to amend one of the projects, as you can see here, Main Street water main upgrades, to increase the gross capital costs because you have some updated estimates now, that are being undertaken. Additionally, through the review of the wastewater capital listing, there was one project that was included in error, and that was the Jordan Village Improvement Project. So that has been removed from the DC calculations. And based on these two changes, the water DC does increase from $5,953 to $5,968, so about $15 increase on a single-family home. There are similar increases as well for the other unit types and non-residential, I should say. And for wastewater DCs, by removing that Jordan Village improvements, that has gone down from $4,900 to $4,457. So just to give you an overview, your current development charges right now for your current bylaw, you are looking at an all-in cost for singles and semi-detached dwelling units of about $35,954. So that would be the DC for a single detached home. That would be on full services. And then as you can see, as you go through the smaller unit types, that charge then goes down to $29,056. $24,212 for large apartments, the 2 bedrooms plus, and then the $14,765 for the bachelor and 1 bedroom apartments. And then you also have a charge for special care, special dwelling units. So these are more your, retirement homes, or really the special care homes that really have a large residential component to it. So we do charge almost on a per person or per bed basis. So that's why it represents the lowest charge at $12,100. And then you also have a Camden charge on stormwater drainage, which you've been recovering due to your investment in that area, dating back several years. Your current non-residential charges, I apologize, I couldn't fit this all in one slide, but you do have, we broke it down into a per square foot or per square meter basis, depending on how you like to, interpret the numbers. From a per square foot basis, it's about $21.70 for commercial, $9.04 for industrial, and $15.44 for institutional per square foot of development. And then the corresponding square meter charges are on the screen as well. With respect to the calculated charges, again, these numbers that you're seeing on the screen are updated as per the February 9th addendum. So you can see right now the calculated charge for singles and semis is actually $44,138. The largest being, your services related to a highway. You have quite a bit of road projects. And then extending from that, then you have, your parks and recreation, water, wastewater, storm, etc. And as I mentioned, similar to the current charges, as you go down the list, the smaller unit types have a smaller charge. So a townhouse or a multiple is at $36,500, $31,200 for the 2 bedroom apartments and larger, and then $20,239 for the smaller 1 bedroom or studio apartments. And then that special care charge on a per bedroom, per bed basis is now $16,916. And as you can see, the Camden area-specific charges for stormwater have just been indexed. So again, you're just collecting for an infrastructure that you historically have invested in. Now, keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, that all of these rates are subject to that mandatory phase-in as soon as you implement the new bylaw. In terms of the non-residential development charges, as you can see, we now have a category for primary, as we do have square footage for primary growth. However, you do currently exempt it right now, so that is something for council to consider if that's something you wish to continue for your bylaw passage in April. But we do have a calculated amount of $3.23. And then similarly, we have the remainder of the ICI, the industrial, commercial, and institutional developments. And that's roughly $28.89 for commercial, $12.03 for industrial, and $21.40 for institutional. In terms of a rate comparison, I think this table illustrates it a little bit cleaner for council and members of the public. As you can see, your current charges right now are at $35,954. During our calculated release of the background study in December, it was at $44,568. With the addendum updates, we're now at $44,138. And as you can see, the yellow highlights represent where the changes are, which is water and wastewater. As I mentioned earlier, with the mandatory phase-in to 80%, that $44,138 figure would actually be equal to $35,310 starting day one of your new bylaw. So that is slightly lower than what you're currently charging for now. But again, this is a mandatory phase-in that you must adhere to until, of course, the province does release any further indications as to how they'd like to proceed for the phase-in or studies. And then similarly for the non-residential, I provided this on a per square meter. The next page also provides a per square feet. But essentially, as you can see right now, your current charges, for, let's say, primary, you didn't have one before, but now it's at $34.77 per square meter. For commercial, it's $310.97, so an increase from the $233.68. $129.49 for industrial, and $230.35 for institutional. When looking at this from a 80% phase-in, the primary would equal $27.82, which again, right now is currently exempt. Commercial would be at $248.78, so just a little bit higher than your current charge. Industrial would be $103.59, which again, slightly higher than your $97. And then your institutional would be at $184.28. And then on a per square foot basis, same idea. I'll leave this for council and the public. I believe this is all posted, so you should be able to reference this if you're looking at it from a square foot basis. Now, in terms of a survey for the development charge rates amongst your peers, we took a look at essentially all of Niagara region. And what you'll see here, the arrows denote, the dark teal denotes the current the calculated charge as per the addendum. The light teal that you see, which is third from the left, that is your current charges as of today. And then that pink that you're seeing just immediately to the right of that would be the 80% phase-in of where you would be day one of the passed bylaw. And one thing to note, there are a number of municipalities that are currently undertaking their DCs, and that's denoted in the stars that are at the bottom. So just in order for you to read this slide, the bottom yellow are the upper tier charges, with respect to, the region, and then the upper column is the blue is the lower tier. And then we have the education DCs as well. In terms of the commercial rate, as you can see, essentially you are staying in the same rank that you are compared to the others. As I mentioned, you're probably around that $41 at the end of the day for commercial, which is slightly lower than where you would be once you pass your new bylaw, which would be roughly around that $38, $39 mark per square foot. And then with industrial, again, you're basically staying at the same ranking, just being slightly under Pelham, but over Niagara-on-the-Lake and Port Colborne, which again, they are Port Colborne and Pelham, amongst others, are undertaking a current DC. And for next steps, that concludes my presentation. As I mentioned, today was the public meeting, and the next timeline would be coming back to council on April 15th to consider the bylaw.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Byron. So I'm going to open it up to committee for questions pertaining just to the presentation at this point. We're going to be going directly to the report after delegations. So if committee has any questions regarding the presentation. Councillor Reimer, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. Thank you, Byron, for the presentation. Lots of material to chew on here. This goes in a little bit into the report, but you brought it up in your presentation tonight too. It has to do with the DC methodology. And basically, it's under the deductions that the process that we go through. And the one is the benefit of existing developments. And I know in I got it in the report as well, chapter 4. It has a little more information on that. But is it possible for you just to fill out that line a little bit, not necessarily in total details, but just, we say the phrase, it's overused already, growth pays for growth. But there is some services are easy to, differentiate. If we have an existing water main, let's say, and we're putting on a new cul-de-sac and you put on a brand new water main, that's one thing. But if we have a feeder main that's been used with existing development over X amount of years, I'm assuming that's that calculation. I'm just using that as an example. Could you fill that phrase in a little bit, the benefit, the reduction that we have for the benefit to existing development? Through you, Chair Timmers.
Yeah, a great question through the chair. Using that example, when we do work with staff, we take a look at the benefit to existing, from a project by project basis. And as you mentioned, there may be some projects in there where it's really nearing the end of its useful life. So therefore, there is no growth per se from replacing that asset. But we do take a look at each individual capital project and assess, what is the growth share of that project. So in your example with that feeder main, let's assume that, it was already 80 years in the ground and it's a 300 millimeter feeder main. But if the town was to rip it up and put in, let's say, a 450 millimeter, then that first 300 is 100% replacement. So the cost for replacing that 300 is 100% benefit to existing. However, since we're upsizing by that additional 150 millimeters, that is all 100% growth, because why else would you upsize if not to, provide for the new developments that would be, down the road or, would connect for that feeder main. So that is something that we do look at. And it also goes to show with other projects where if an asset is being replaced ahead of schedule, then now you're actually replacing it, your replacement is only, say, 70 years of the 80. So the fact that I'm replacing it 10 years ahead of schedule, I'm having to do that because of growth. So I should be allowed to allocate that 10 years worth of replacement to the new developments, because otherwise I could have just if I didn't develop, I could have just left that water main or feeder main until year 80. So we do have to go through that calculation one project by project. And a lot of the work, we do work with staff collaboratively to try to figure out, what are the criterias, what is the nature of the expansion or the nature of the work. So, and we try to take a look at, best practices from other municipalities. If your master plans identify capacity increases, then we would turn to that. So there's a number of documents that we can turn to, as long as, we're providing the best foot forward on, the benefit to existing percentage.
Okay. Follow up, if I may, Chair Timmers? And thank you, Brian. Like that helps me a lot. But on working with our water main, I hope I explained myself right, working on the, going one step further. So we said at 70 years, we're replacing it 10 years ahead of schedule. If there was no growth, then at the 80th year, the existing development is boring the whole costs. So does that, Fraser, does that play a part in the calculation too, if that makes sense?
Yep, through the chair, excellent question. Yes, so if it is 100% replacement, it would not be included in the calculations. So we wouldn't even include that project in the DC because it's 100% replacement at that point.
Okay. Oh, great.
And
Thank
that
you.
would be picked up through water rates or your wastewater
Sure.
rates.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Timmers.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Next up, we have Counselor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Timmers, and through you to Byron. Byron, thank you very much for the presentation. Question about transit. So I had a regional transit meeting today, and, we're part of the on-demand transit portion. So we pay for the service that we use. And as the population builds out, we're probably going to need more vehicles to service the need. Is this something that's picked up at a regional level? Is that why we're ineligible for it?
Great question. Through the chair, my understanding is, yes, it is a regional responsibility. So your regional DCs do capture the additional vehicles or any additional infrastructure through the region's development charges.
Okay, but there's also a portion that when it comes to, it's almost a user pay system. So, we become a creature of our success. Or the more usage that we have, we actually pay, a higher amount, and that's on the backs of the existing taxpayers. So in essence, growth isn't paying for the increase in service. So how do we get around that? Or is there a way to get around that?
Through the chair, as of right now, I'd have to take a look at the details as I don't want to provide you any misinformation. But I'm not sure whether your costs would actually go towards the capital or would it go towards the operating of these
Operating,
vehicles?
okay.
And operating is ineligible under the Development Charge Act. We can only include capital costs for infrastructure or even contracts, but not operating costs.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Pachariva. I am not seeing any other people in the queue. So thank you very much, Byron, for your presentation. I'm now going to move to delegations. So thank you very much, Byron.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to, we don't have any delegations, registered delegations, but we do have a couple of people in the audience. So I'm just wondering if either one of you are here tonight and would like to speak to the committee about our DC bylaw? No. Okay, very good. Okay, I just wanted to give you that opportunity. So, we have no delegations. And so thank you. The statutory public meeting is adjourned. We will now move directly into report PD-06-24 regarding the development charge review. So, who are we,
So if the committee has any questions, we can go to questions of the report.
okay, so we're done having a presentation of the report. Okay, very good. Okay, I just wanted to clarify. So I see Mary Stin has her name in the queue, so please go ahead, Mary Stin.
Thank you very much, Chair Timmers. And I think that my question is going to be for Charlotte. And I'm referring to, do you have the package that was circulated? I'm looking at page 235 of 411 of the Appendix B.
Charlotte? Okay.
Through you, Chair, to the mayor, I'm just looking for that page. So I have Appendix B, and you're looking.
Page 235. It would be page 12 if Appendix B were standing alone, but in the whole report, it's page 235. It's Table E as in Easter, S-2.
Yes, I have it. Thank
Okay.
you, Mayor.
So my question is related to losses in this process. So through you, Madam Chair, we're not in the same position as other municipalities that haven't had any updates to our to our development charge bylaw. And so I believe that this page is probably new, and I'm interested to know what the burden is, if any, on the taxpayer. And as I'm reading this report, which is entitled Summary of Expenditures Anticipated Over the Life of the Bylaw, I would just like to review with Charlotte what the impact is going to be potentially on the levy. And I believe that that's what I'm seeing on this page. So I guess first I should clarify that.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor, I'll do my best to walk through my understanding of this table. So the start of the table is the total gross expenditures that are planned for all the capital projects that are included in the DC study. And then it's being reduced by the benefit to existing development. So that's what Byron was talking about earlier when he gave the example if there's a water main and a portion of it's just being replaced. So that's a cost that the existing taxpayers or ratepayers would pay anyways, essentially is how I would explain that. And then it's subtracting the post-period benefit. So that's amounts that are going to be recovered from future development. So it doesn't necessarily mean it won't be recovered. It just means it won't be recovered from the development that's occurring during this period in the DC study. I see Byron nodding at me, so that's good. And then we have ineligible costs, which is quite small from levels of service. And what that has to do with is under the DC legislation, there's a cap in the amount that we can charge based on our historical levels of service. So you have to look at what you've been providing to the residents over that period of time, and you provide a similar level of service to the new residents that are going to come online. And then the last one has to do with a reduction for grants, subsidies, and other contributions. So really, as I read it, I don't think this table in itself is necessarily saying there are increased costs that are going to be paid by our taxpayers and ratepayers. It's saying that these are all the things that we've used to arrive at what the costs are that should be borne by the new development.
Okay, so through you, Madam Chair, if you go to the next paragraph, it says that an annual amount of 13.15 million will need to be contributed from taxes and rates or other sources. So we don't have a number for what that is right now, so I don't want to suppose that this is a horrible number, because I don't know what the current number is. Do you have any idea what the current number might be?
Through you, Mayor, or through you, Chair, to the Mayor, I don't have that number. It is, what we are contributing right now is lower than that amount. And what I would need to do is add the transfers to reserve that are in the operating budgets for water and wastewater, as well as the transfers to capital and reserves that are in the operating budget. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I mean, we've been talking about that infrastructure gap as part of our budget discussions, and I think this is another example. It is over time, right? So, you know, I know the CAO has talked about the ebbs and flows, so there are peak years and then there are lower years, so this 10 million or this 13.15 million is over a period of time. But yes, we need to get our contributions up over the course of time, and that's why we have that pressure to fill the infrastructure gap.
Okay, so there's a number of things that are in this report that make it clear. Some of them provide clarity. Some of them are about fairness and ensuring that we're not taking more from the new service than we should, adding more to those costs than we should be. So there's some of that in here. But there's the question, because of the way in which the province is going about calculations in regard to building in particular, that you're left with this belief that we are going to be on the short end of things. However, having said, as I said earlier, I have more, I have a stronger belief that because we've been doing this is our third time out now, so we've been working away at this. We're not going back and dealing with a document that's 10, 15 years old, or even 20 years old, which could be the case. I just want to, I don't want there to be some outrageous surprise at the end of all of this. And so this chart isn't really telling me what I want. It's quite clear as it is. So where do I find that document that would explain to the public what the impact would be? Because people are very interested to know that growth is paying for growth. Or maybe we should stop saying that. If it's not going to pay for growth, we should stop saying it. So, do you have an answer to that question?
I'll try, and I may need the CAO to jump in here as well, but I think maybe potentially, Mayor, what you're looking for is a calculation of what is the impact of the phase-in of the DCs and what the changes of the legislation have been to the amounts that the municipality is going to collect. We don't have a calculation of that. That is something we could potentially estimate. So I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, but we don't have that calculation at this time. And then in particular, you know, we're still waiting for some of the details of some of this legislation to come down. So I think that's part of what's made it a little bit difficult to estimate some of the impact.
So, I'm sure that Mr. CEO has something to add. Is when we talk about being made whole, is that part of that is this part of that discussion?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor, yes. So being made whole is the impact of that legislation. In part, it is what those phase-ins are going to cost the municipality, but it is not represented in Table ES2.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mary Sue.
Maybe
Oh,
Mr. CEO.
Yeah, yeah, I'm going on to our CAO. Go ahead, Mike.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think, one of the mayor's statements around we need to stop saying growth pays for growth is probably an accurate statement. And I know me saying that's going to generate a lot of attention, but I think it's accurate. You'll recall in my opening comments before introducing Byron, I said, the continued goal of growth paying for growth to the greatest extent possible, notwithstanding some of the legislative changes in place and our ability to collect. And so I think what you're seeing is there will be a shortfall. And we address that two ways. We try to plug that hole through going to senior levels of government and finding funding. And some of that is the making us whole piece, which we're still waiting to see. Another way is you look at potentially delaying some of the projects. Now, if some of those projects are essential to support the growth, then that's another decision we need to make. But I think the assessment that we're going to be short potentially is a fair comment to make. It's one of those things we won't know. There is a general principle provincially around growth paying for growth, but some of these things, I think the reason you're seeing municipalities push back, and I think as Byron highlighted in December of 2023, new minister, Calandra, said he's going to review those 2022 decisions that were made, one of them being the phase-in, as well as what can be included and not included. Because I think what you're hearing from all municipalities is this gap exists and it's going to continue to exist unless we address it. So I think the mayor's comment is a fair comment, and I would agree with it in terms of let's stop using that language, because I think it's always been to the greatest extent possible.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. CAO, for those comments. I have Councilor Rajima on the screen. You're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to ask about being made whole, and I know that Councillor Reimer brought a motion sometime in the last 4 or 6 months, basically reaching out to the province and asking that details of how municipalities are going to be made whole is made clear. And I just heard the CAO say that Minister Calandra has committed to reviewing details of the legislation. And so I was going to ask if we expect some kind of a response to that motion that was sent out. So I'll still ask the question, do we expect some kind of a response to that? And have we received it? And is the answer what you said earlier on, that Minister Calandra is going to be reviewing it?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to refer to our CAO. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to the councillor. The announcement that came out in December predates, or at least the anticipation of that announcement predates our motion. And so I would say, I think we're expecting a response back. I think what government's going to tell you is the recently announced Housing Enabling Water Fund is one example of them trying to make municipalities whole, of which the town of Lincoln will be submitting an application, as a number of municipalities will do. Typically, the making us whole will come as a result of programs and initiatives and infrastructure stimulus programs that are set up, that being the first one we've seen. So I anticipate whatever response we get back will highlight that project, or will highlight that initiative, that announcement that recently came up, but we haven't received anything more official, but I do anticipate with most of these that we will receive something, Councillor Regina.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep, thank you, Councillor. Next, we have Councillor Bernay. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. Through you, I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I see in the report we have a letter dated January the 25th that shows up as Appendix C. Appreciate that resident sending their comments from January the 25th. In Mr. Tam's presentation, he talked about a February the 14th stakeholder meeting. I'm assuming that because maybe the agenda was published, there is nothing in this report. So I'm just wondering through you, Madam Chair, if someone could speak to when council will be getting information from that stakeholder meeting that occurred on February 14th.
Okay. Back to our CAO. Go ahead, Mike.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Councillor's correct. February 14th was that date, and we had already published, and as a result of that, it wasn't included. We didn't get a lot of questions. I do have the 8 questions that we did receive during that 2.5, 3-hour session. We can definitely make sure council has that, as well as the responses that go together with those. We did commit to making sure that all those in attendance also had this information. It will be included in a final report, but we can definitely send it to council in an email form and make sure that it's shared as appropriate. I do anticipate over the coming days and weeks leading into that report that we're probably going to hear more from the stakeholder industry. I can tell you, a good number of the questions did focus around farm buildings, did focus around farm help houses, a little bit on hotels, and just some general questions around development charges, how they're high across the province and what they go to pay for and things like that. So those were generally some of the questions we got, but more of that will be shared with council.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Councillor Bernay?
Yeah, just a follow-up question through you, Chair, to the CEO.
Yep,
So
go ahead.
I appreciate that response, Mr. Kirkopoulos. I'm just wondering, when we go about, some of this public engagement, or as we call it, stakeholder meetings, how do we actually go about that? Do we engage the stakeholders, whether it's the local home builders association, developers that we know have been developing or might be coming to develop in Lincoln? Do we engage them and request, or do we sit back and wait for that engagement to come to us?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Councillor, we go out and engage them. So the Niagara Home Builders and Hamilton Home Builders were both represented. They do have some crossover in the type of developers that we've got here. And I do know that we've also got an additional stakeholder meeting next week that will also include us outreaching to certain groups. So where possible, we do the outreach, and that's, I think, been consistent for at least the last two, and I see both Byron and Kathleen nodding, the last 2 or 3 DC studies.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bernay. Next, we have Councillor Mikulik. Nope.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. Through you to staff, maybe Charlotte will take a stab at this one, or Matt Bruder. I'm not, and my apologies for being late. I had one heck of a day at school. So looking at the Watson report on page 18, we do forecasting. We make projections, we take best estimates, best guesses. But, you know, what always concerns me is what if our estimates or what if our guesses are not accurate? And when I look at 2022, 34, 21, 20, 268, 203, and then I look at 2023, we estimated it at 345. And if I'm not mistaken, if we can confirm this, I think we only had 96 residential starts. And I'm wondering if we should have used that sort of data with this report. And if that data would have been used, would that have to change the DC amount that we would have to assign? And I ask that because we rely on DC revenue to pay for this growth-related infrastructure.
Okay, Councillor, I see Director Bruder is online, so I'm going to ask him if he has comments for you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and hope everyone can hear me. Sorry about the poor lighting where I'm at, but with respect to your comments, Councillor, and your questions, you're right. I mean, some years we're going to be up, some years we're going to be down based on a variety of factors. It's pretty hard to consider that accurately, but what we do is we take the range and we ground truth it a little bit, the range in terms of years. We ground truth it by looking at what our overall growth projections are. This is information from, first of all, planning, looking at all the development concepts we have in the pipeline, what stages they're at, and making an evaluation based on that. Things do change over time, as they always do, especially when you're forecasting, but we take that and all the work we did that your council is aware of in working with the region to establish our growth projections and targets. And then we also look at building permit data as well. I can tell you you're right. That number you referenced in 2023 is accurate. It's a little bit of an uptick based on the year before, down from the few years before that. But again, we anticipate, over the term of what we're considering for this DC study, the growth projections that we've been moving forward with. And those growth projections are used when we look at infrastructure needs. And again, there is a little bit of an ebb and flow, but when you look over the overall horizon that we're considering for the study, it's as accurate as possible. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, it does through you. It does answer my question. The numbers are what they are. It's just, I just want to make sure that we're not being overestimating our growth. Because the next question I'll ask through you, Chair Timmers, is to Charlotte. What happens if we are light on our actual growth numbers? I have a feeling I know the answer, but I don't know if I want to hear it.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Well, as Director Bruder was saying, we have a basis for these projections, right? So we have a lot of data and a lot of information from the region and our own planning documents that are used to arrive at these estimates, and we need them to be estimates that we have a basis for, right? So we can't necessarily adjust it down because because we aren't sure. We have to use the information that we have and the data that we have. And so then what we do about that is we have the reserve fund. So the way the development charges are structured is that you can contemplate things like debt, you can use tools like reserves, and so the same way we've talked about some of our capital projects and how we distribute those costs over time by using tools like debt and reserves, the development charges are very similar. So when you have a year that's a peak and you collect a lot of development charges, you put them into the DC Reserve Fund, and then you're able to pull from that when you have a year when there's a dip. Or sometimes you take out debt, so that you can pay that debt off as you collect the development charges over time. So I would say we use those tools to help manage that, the peaks and the valleys, even though it won't always be evenly distributed.
Okay, I thank you for that answer, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Next, we have Counselor Reimer. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Council Chambers. Through to staff, page 3 on the staff report that we've got. Just a couple of questions of clarification. One was for attainable housing. So I realize the thresholds and the time has not been set yet. But there's a line in there, attainable housing, that is sold first to a purchaser that's at arm's length, and Byron touched a little bit on this in his presentation as well, too, to the first purchaser. And then there's something that, the next line is that we'll be tracking that, or we'll have a minimum of 25 years via an agreement. What happens to the second and third purchaser? Is that something that we have to track along with real estate, or how does attainable housing, how does that work? Through Director Bruder or Charlotte? I'm not sure who wants to tackle it.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm thinking Matt Bruder, Director, there you are.
There he is.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Matt.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's a little bit of a tough one, and one we've been, as you know, with certain developments that are coming forward that we've been looking at. I think there's still a little bit of clarity to come on that, but generally speaking, I would suspect that would be when you say an agreement through the municipality. These types of agreements, especially related to things like this, residential land use, they're registered on the title of the lands. So I would think, the first purchaser, yes, that's who it gets dealt with through that. But ultimately speaking, since it's on the title of the lands, it still carries forward. In terms of monitoring, that's something that we're going to have to take a closer look at, to be honest with you, because it is a little bit of a difficulty, I think, that we're looking at in terms of how we keep track of that and how we stay on top, especially when we're going to be seeing multiple examples of it moving forward. So I think a little bit more information will be forthcoming as we continue to delve into that.
Okay, thank you, Director Bruder. And one more, if I may, Chair Timmers. Same table, and it's the studies. Again, Byron touched on it a bit. They've been removed, and I realize this is under review. But all studies basically generally are affected, and so if we still might need studies, then who pays for that in the meantime, or is that something that's under suspension until some more information comes forward, or how does that look? Through you, Chair Timmers.
Matt, are you going to take that one as well?
I think I could start, Madam
Yep.
Chair.
Okay, please go
Well, I
ahead.
think inevitably some of the studies that would have been captured previously that we can't do anymore, those are now going to be considered more of an operating expense moving forward, unless we can tie it into some type of capital works. But generally speaking, some of the works, like some of the studies you see in terms of our visioning studies or things like that, instead of being growth related now, I think there's going to be a little more of a burden on the operating side of things.
So just for clarification, operating means us, Town of Lincoln? Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Thank you very much, Director Bruder. Thank you, Chair Timmers.
Thank you, Counselor Reimer, and thank you for asking both of those questions, because they were my questions, so that worked out really well. Okay, I am not seeing anyone else in the queue, so I don't see any other questions, so there's no further questions. I have a motion moved by Counselor Pachariva to receive and file report PD-06-24 regarding the draft development charge background study and development charge bylaw and presentation. That a recommendation report be prepared once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I'll now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councilor Regima, can I have your vote, please?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And that motion carries. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Deputy Clerk. So we are now considering the consent agenda, inclusive of item 6.1, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of November 30th, 2023. Would any member of committee like to remove the item from the consent agenda to discuss? Okay, seeing none. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray that all items listed under the heading of consent agenda for Tuesday, February 20th, 2024 be adopted as recommended. The item 6.1, Museum Advisory Committee minutes of November 30th, 2023. Devan, if you could please open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. Councillor Rajima?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Bernay?
I'm just wondering, if my math is correct, there's 2 councillors remote and 7 of us here. There's only one person absent this evening, that's Councillor Russell, right? Both votes have been 7-0. I'm just wondering who we're missing, because there should be 8 people voting. Right? So there's just one missing, so we've only seen 7-0, 7-0 on the 2.
Thank you, and through you, actually, Councillor Mick, you weren't included in that. I just put you in, so it should be popping up for you now. I'll have to take that back, and I can do your votes electronic or verbally.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes and yes,
Thank you.
but I didn't vote.
Thank you.
I had voted.
Chair?
Thanks. We'll ensure that we watch the video, and we'll ensure that people's votes are accounted for appropriately.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So we are now at the general business and finance portion of the agenda. We have no delegations, and we are now considering report LS-01-24 regarding staff direction list status update. The town clerk and our CAO will provide some comments. Who would like to go first? Madam Clerk, please go ahead.
Thank you. If the CIO doesn't mind that, I'll go first. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. As Council may recall that in 2022, the previous term of Council, this report was developed to highlight the completed achievements that both Council and staff have accomplished. It was also an opportunity to highlight the ongoing work that is currently being taken on by staff as directed by Council. And this document is an important part of what Council and staff are doing together to meet our vision, mission, and strategic priorities, as well as being transparent. I will add that this list is a continually reviewed list at our corporate leadership level as it relates to our work plan, and all of these items are in addition to Council's priorities. So I'll hand it over to the CAO to add some further comments if he has some. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, not a lot more to add to Julie's comments, other than to say a lot of this work that you see on this list, and it's substantial. There's nearly 100 items on the list, and if we broke them out, probably a lot more than that. And these are things that, over the last number of years, are things that are directed by Council, a lot of them around this particular table, that often when we're having conversations, these are directions that are given, they're motions that are passed, and as a result, this is work we add to our existing work plan. So just want to highlight that there is a significant amount of work that goes into the list, into completing the list and monitoring the list. And so on top of the presentations and general updates we give you on our strategic plan and the achievement of our strategic plan, what you see here is in addition to that. So as I said, nearly 100 projects or initiatives or motions or things that we've addressed for Council. Significant amount of them completed, a few in progress and yet to be completed, and we'll continue to update Council. I think, as the clerk said, it is a way to share this information, to continue to be transparent, and to be in front of Council should you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. CAO. It is quite an extensive list for sure, and I really appreciate this list because it certainly keeps us, on track, and there is a lot of work that's happening, and it's easy to forget some of the motions that have been passed a few years ago. So this is a great update. I'm going to open it up to committee if you have any questions, and I see Councilor Rajima has her hand up. So Councilor Rajima, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. So I wanted to talk about, I think it's the 6th item down, and it's report PW 1620, the truck safety update. And it was a motion that I brought that staff bring back a report regarding various regional roads and portions thereof, and a timeline for effectively negotiation of Lincoln's takeover of these roads or a portion thereof in order to improve safety and economic visibility by alleviating inappropriate truck pressures and better directing traffic flow, et cetera, et cetera. And in this, the comments, this could be considered complete, but isn't an ongoing town initiative. And I want to say that's absolutely true. I've seen, I want to just, give a shout out to staff, council, Councillor Brunet and Timmers, who brought an original motion back in 2019. The mayor's advocacy at the region, Councillor Foster's advocacy at the region, and all the work that's gone on a continual basis to deal with the issue of inappropriate truck traffic, particularly coming through Beamsville's downtown area. Never been an easy issue to tackle, and it continues to be a very tough issue to deal with. And so that's my shout out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rajima. Excuse me. Councilor Reimer, you're next in the queue. Please
Thank you,
go
Chair
ahead.
Timmers. Just a general big thank you to staff. This is, when you're firing, I didn't realize there's 100 there. Mr. CEO filled me in on that, and it's nothing, none of these things get done during coffee break or around the water cooler. Like they all have a lot of pieces to them. So just thank you very much for all this besides sort of your regular jobs. You have to do this stuff. So thank you very much for continuing this and also for this kind of report. It's really good to kind of keep check, and sometimes we forget how much stuff we've actually accomplished. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Timmers.
Thank you, Councilor Reimer. Mayor Easton? Oops. There you go.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. A couple of things. I also was really quite overwhelmed by the amount of work that goes into this, because it's not, these are not simple solutions. And I think that Councillor Rajima's comment about, she went through that kind of first, second phase. Maybe phase 3 is really included with the blitzes that go on. But now the legislation has changed on the provincial legislation around infill. And so the trucks that we were talking about in 2019 are not the trucks that we're talking about now. This is a whole new demand, and there's things about it that we want to be part of, that are necessary for us to be part of. So although the initial motion was certainly, the needs of it are really well under control, I certainly hope that we're not going to leave this one out there as a complete issue, because I think it's going to continue to be impacted. And there's a few like that, and that's what is a bit concerning about a report like this, because it's not part of the work plan necessarily. It becomes a priority of council by virtue of activity that's going on in the town that needs attention. And there's a few that are like that. I don't, maybe Councillor Pachariva remembers this, but there used to be something called a motion book. The motion book was kept by the clerk, and those were the days when you might have 1 or 2 additional motions come out of a meeting, or maybe not one in a month, but they were kept track of in a book, and the clerk would bring those back, or you would go in and look at them if it was an issue that you had been part of. And this is just like, I can't even begin to tell you, this is just so much bigger than that it almost makes you think that we have created a major amount of work here. And I'm not sure who all's doing this work. It's important work, but it certainly shouldn't be underestimated, and it is very complicated when you look at all the different elements that come together. So thanks very much for this, and I really don't even know what to say about it. We can't do without it, but I don't know, Mr. CAO, who's doing the work, because I haven't noticed us approving any new bodies, but we know how to ask the questions, there's no doubt about that. Thanks very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mary Easton. It is an incredible amount of work, and when I was going through the charts and I was, oh, it's completed. I was really happy to see that, because it is an incredible amount of work. But I do, your point about, there are a few in here that will be ongoing for a long, maybe forever, or many years down the road. Maybe we need to color code those ongoing ones. Just throwing that out there to our CAO, we could highlight them, but, and I kind of do like the book idea, but I think it'd be a very thick book. Anyway, thank you, Mary Easton. And I'm not seeing any hands up or anyone else in the queue. So there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Bernay to receive and file as information report LS-01-24 pertaining to the staff direction list status update. Deputy Clerk, if you could open the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. Councillor Regima, may I get your vote, please?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Miklick, I see you're in there now. Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you very much. Moving on, we're now considering report LS-02-24 regarding amendments to the public notice policy. And our town clerk will provide some comments. Please go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Chair Timmers. So this report is before council tonight due to the declining traditional newspaper publications available in the ever-changing media landscape. So our public notice policy had to be reviewed and updated. It hasn't been updated since, I believe, 2015. So the amended policy put forward tonight provides more flexibility while ensuring legislative requirements are being met and engagement with the community are the top priority. In instances where newspaper notices are legislatively required, the town will continue to use the appropriate newspaper based on the general circulation requirement, in addition to notices posted to the town's website and digital publications. Many other municipalities have moved towards the publication of notices on their websites, either exclusively or with a hybrid approach, given the changing media landscape. So we are accounting for all available methods afforded to the town and will ensure that we have every opportunity provided to all of our citizens as it's in regards to public notices. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Do members of committee have any questions? Councillor Mikulik?
Thank you very much, Chair Timmers. Through you to the clerk. Just looking at the, we're going to move away from print and when we don't have to use print. That's my understanding. The concern I have is with regards to the amount of time or the notice that we give on certain things, whether it be trivial or little or serious, of serious nature. I believe a lot of these items are 7 days. And I'm wondering if that's enough time. And I take a look at, let's say for this meeting here, we had, you have holidays mixed in, and sometimes 7 days during a holiday, during Christmas, may not be enough, in my opinion. Should we at least make that 7 business days, perhaps, or 14 days? What are your thoughts on that, or what are other municipalities doing that would give residents enough time to find out, research, and then ask?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, please go ahead.
Through to the councillor, through the chair. So I would say that we publish our agendas 10 days in advance. That's in our procedural bylaw, so that will not change. And in and around any kind of other publications. When looked at and reviewed what other municipalities are doing, some are doing 5 days. So we looked at what we normally publish, and I would say that the 7 days is business days. It doesn't include weekends, but I would say that 7 days is normal. 14 days, you know, I would say that depending on what the notice is, if we took a look at it and it was deemed to require more notice or more advanced time, we would absolutely do that. But 7 days seems to be on average. But it's up to council if you wish to increase that to 14 days in the policy. But 5 days is also what most municipalities are putting forward.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I just, I don't know if I noticed or if I read that it was 7 business days.
Okay.
But, you know, again, like I just want to make sure that I don't hear from people, I only just found out. I want to make sure people have that opportunity or that time before it's too late to voice their concerns, should they have any. That's my
Sure.
That's my reason for bringing it up. And if any other member of council wishes to wonder if that's enough time or not, feel free. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Councillor Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to our Madam Clerk, I recognize that a lot of the motivation behind the policy change is around costs, the costs of having to publish, but also of the decreasing availability of print news. When we talk about ways that the town can connect with people, some of the things that you're talking about here, like newsletters or inserts or printed handouts, those strike me as being relatively expensive as well, perhaps more expensive than newspapers. So is the idea that we're going to be phasing it out, or is the idea going to be that as long as print newspaper is available, we'll continue using it, and we just want to make sure the policy states that we don't have to, or just a little bit more background on that, please?
No problem. To the councillor through the chair. So I would say that the inserts are probably, there's a cost associated with that anyways, especially with the tax bills. And so an additional insert would be very minimal. When you're already accounting for the newsletters, additional information in a newsletter, that's minimal, right? I would say that there's not a lot of print publications legislatively required, and those are related to the financial budget, the election notice. So a lot of this is over and above. And so we're taking a look at what is not legislatively required, where we can utilize, you know, our social media platforms, where we can utilize our digital TVs, where we can utilize other alternative ways to really kind of save on the cost. If you'll notice on one of the pages there, we were also looking to recover some costs, right? So in addition to some of the Planning Act notices, most municipalities actually recoup some of that cost through the planning application phase. And so for those public notices that go out, planning and I did work together, and so we'll be looking at recovering some of those costs associated in terms of Canada Post and all of that. So we're hoping that that'll kind of, you know, help us with some of those costs associated with that.
And a clarifying question, if I may. So then, I think my concern, I recognize, I appreciate the approach of trying to minimize our costs, because we all would like to spend as little money as possible and unless necessary. But there are a certain demographic within our citizens who just don't have access to all of these digital files that are available. So while I do recognize that in some ways print media is becoming more challenging, I think it does serve a pretty important role for a certain portion of our constituency. So I would just, I'm sure that you guys have taken that into account, but then whenever we take something away from a print ad, if we can make sure that it's somehow being replaced in another way that is not digital for those who can't access it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the councillor. So, councillor, all good questions. I think overarching the desire behind the policy change is to give us additional tools in the changing face of media landscape. We all know that in this day and age, there are less and less print media out there. So the idea is not necessarily in terms of cost, but how can we make sure that we're reaching all of our residents, be it through digital or through other print media as well. We do bring up the idea of newsletters. We do issue newsletters quarterly throughout the municipality. The idea is how can we piggyback on some of that stuff? But really, at the end of the day, depending on what it is, we will obviously ascertain what is our best avenue to reach those residents, just to make sure that everyone is well informed. We do recognize that not everyone is as social media savvy or digital savvy as some of us, but the idea being is making sure we're covering all aspects and to reach out to those residents.
Thank you very much, Director Deanne and Madam Clerk. Next, we have Councillor Pachariva. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and through you, I guess to the clerk and Mr. Deanne. So yeah, it says online publications are more accessible. Well, they are and they aren't, because the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, St. Catharines Standard all require a subscription. So I get the point of trying to maintain costs. Now, the costs that are included in the document, are those rack rates or are those one-offs? Because I know, having done advertising before in publications, you get a much better rate if you commit to a certain number of ads. So just curious on those numbers.
Director Deanne, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through to the councillor. So, councillor, what you see in terms of the financial lists under those two publications are more so one-offs. We do have some, if we know there are certain things coming down the pipeline, we will pre-purchase some advertising, but these are one-off lists currently. As noted in this, we do still have a weekly newspaper locally. We do still have a daily newspaper locally as well, but obviously in terms of the policy change, we're not too sure what the future is going to bring when it comes to print media and traditional media. So the idea is to really give us some of those tools to make sure we're reaching out to our residents.
Okay, yeah, because that, through you, Madam Chair, I mean, that's ultimately where we want to be. I know a lot of people, have gone away from X and Facebook because, they're not really spots to find news anymore. All it is, chatter about discontent. So I think that the print media still has a place, especially in our community where, the circulation of the news now is greater than Niagara This Week was. And something like ward meetings, they're not statutory, so they wouldn't be part of the normal advertising. But I think it's important that we continue with something like that we try to reach as many people as we want, and also kind of looking maybe for a report to come down about communication strategy. Driving throughout the province, see municipal buildings with digital signs that can become a revenue stream and also used to advertise towns' goings and comings. We've got some antiquated ones at some of the fire stations, and really need to utilize our high traffic areas like the Fleming Center and the Jordan Lyons Park more to our advantage. So just looking for something like that.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone's lights on. I don't know if there's any response to those comments, or?
Thank you, Chair. I could jump in, and all good comments, Councillor. And I know in speaking with our manager of communications, we are looking at coming back to council with a little bit of an update in terms of some of the communication tools that we do use. We do have a year in review coming fairly soon, and which we'll be talking a little bit about those tools, but we'll be looking at a little bit more of a fulsome depth or in-depth analysis of what our tools are, how we can best utilize them. Obviously in the change of, or in the, the ever-changing landscape that is the media current today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, thank you, Councillor. I have Madam Mayor up next.
I'll pass, Councillor Councillor Pachariva brought up the electronic notices. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Timmers, for the opportunity to speak again to the subject with regards to notice. Again, like I'm just looking for clarity. Like when I'm looking at the report, it doesn't specifically say business days. It just says days and then calendar days. So that's 7. And when I'm looking at this, prior to conduct of any of the following activities, the town shall hold public meetings and notice of the public meeting and/or the town's intent to conduct the indicated activities in accordance with this, a name of the change of a municipality, a change of the composition of council, the adoption of an amendment, annual or multi-year, and so on. Some pretty serious things here. And theoretically, according to this report, that's 7 days? Or how do we determine what's a reasonable amount of time?
Madam Clerk?
To the councillor, through the chair. So some of that is not legislatively required. And so we are providing technically over and above what would normally just be posted. So some of it isn't legislatively required that we actually publish in a newspaper article, but if the question is that you feel that the 7 days is not long enough, we can certainly extend that and make it 14 days. We went with 7, like I had mentioned, as it was on average. Most municipalities are doing 5 days, Councillor.
Thank you very much. I understand that. I just, when I look and we can change the name of the town based on 7 days' notice, is what I'm seeing, and that's above and beyond what is legislated to. So if everyone else is good with that, then all right. But I myself, I'm a little bit concerned with 7 days' notice and not having clarity with respect to specific items is the concern I have.
Okay,
Right.
thanks, Councillor. Madam Clerk?
To the councillor, I'd also like to further state that, we wouldn't do anything of that nature without it getting posted in a council agenda, which is 10 days. So, we already have extended that just automatically on how we publish our agendas and all of that. And so I would say that 7 days is minimum, but 10 days in an agenda. But certainly, taking into consideration the magnitude of changing a municipality's name, which is very rare circumstances, I would imagine that, we would even go further than that and even do, even a month or however much notice that we needed to do to ensure that public engagement is top priority. So like I said, we'll always make sure that the public engagement and the notice requirements, we will always go over and above to make sure that people are informed appropriately.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. So I have a motion, moved by Councillor Rajima, that committee receive and file as information report LS-02-24, amendments to the public notice policy, and that council approve the amendments to the public notice policy to remove print media notices and instead utilize the Town of Lincoln's website or online publications where the Municipal Act 2001 SO 2001 C25 as amended does not prescribe that a newspaper must be used for public notice. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Rajima, may I have your vote, please?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We are now considering report FN-01-24 regarding 2023 Q3 operating and capital financial reports. Do members of the committee have any questions? I'm not seeing anyone in the queue. So I have a motion, moved by Councillor Rajima, receive and file report FN-01-24 regarding the 2023 Q3 operating and capital financial reports, and approve the recommendations as presented in Appendix B. I'll now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Regima, may I have your vote, please?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and that motion is closed, and that carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Devan. There being no additional reports to consider, we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. I will now ask the Deputy Clerk to transition to our next committee agenda.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. I will be moving the gavel to Councillor and Chair Tony Brunet to assume the chair at this time for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. One moment.
Thank you, Devan. We are now at the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. 8.1 delegations. We have no delegations this evening. 8.2 reports. We will now consider report PW-02-24, the Prudhome's Water Main Upgrade Project Tender Award. Do members of committee have any questions? Councillor Michalak.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunet. Through you to staff. This is quite a significant project that we're looking at, probably one of the largest infrastructure ones underground that we've looked at, that I recall serving on council. With the recent announcements that the Ford government has made with regards to possible assistance financially with this, should we look at deferring this for a month or two to see if there's any help that, guaranteed help, let's say, from the province? What troubles me is that this is a growth-related project, and we've been given numbers, growth targets by both the province and the region, and yet I don't see the region or the province really assisting us as of right now with respect to funding this project. And I'd really like to see them in some sort of way guaranteed to assist us with this. There's hope, there's a possibility, but at this point, I don't see any signatures here from either level of government. So should we look at communicating with, the company here, Earth Boring, to see if there's a possibility of waiting, and then that way we may get more than what we hope for? Because in my mind, right now, we might get 500,000 in a commitment from the province, 5 million, 10 million. Right now, the commitment is, from what I read, zero.
Director Graham, would you like to possibly respond to that, or the CAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Why don't we tag team it? I know both Dave and I probably have things to contribute, so I'll let Director Graham go first, and then I'll jump in.
Thank you, CAO, and through you, Chair, to the councillor. We wouldn't recommend deferring the award of the contract. So what council has before you tonight is to look at consideration of awarding the tender for the construction of the work. We do have to make a decision on the tender award one way or the other for the contractor. So we wouldn't recommend that, at least from staff's perspective. We do have a really good feel after learning more about the grant program, the criteria around it, that this project really aligns well with the grant. So, staff is totally committed to applying to this grant, and we have a good feeling that it'll be, well received. We can't guarantee we're going to be successful, but the odds are looking pretty good on what we've read about the grant. The problem is if you were to, the timelines are all very, very tight on this. So if you were to not award the contract, and we would, wait for a grant scenario that you were speaking to, Councillor, then we'd have to retender the project in a very short timeline. So in terms of the grant timelines, we have to be prepared to dig ground end of the summer. And to put a tender out like this and go through the proper processes for tendering, that does take a lot of time. Also, we have to be very careful with the contractor market, the bidders. We can't just retender something quickly. This is a public process, and you don't want to get, you don't want to get looked at as a municipality as sort of fishing bid numbers and whatnot. So there are some concerns too if you just retender something in a couple months or a month or whatever that looks like. So those would be my comments on that. I don't know if Mike has anything else he'd like to add.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe just to pick up a little bit on Dave's comments. I think an important part, and we did provide an update to members of council, but I'll reiterate that, and that is the conversation we had with Minister Surma and her staff at Roma, and a subsequent visit from Minister Surma on her way to Niagara Falls a few weeks ago about the project. And since then, our staff has been on numerous conference calls with ministry staff, specifically to have the conversation, can we tender, not break ground, and still be eligible for this? There are a number of municipalities in that similar boat, and so we aren't alone, and the answer to that was unequivocally yes. And so I think what we're looking at doing, and Dave touched upon it, pulling a tender, canceling a tender, potential legal ramifications of that, and I say potential, not by no means scaring council, but just the potential legal ramifications of pulling a tender and then tendering it a few months later when we hear back. The exact same tender could be challenged and could be problematic, so I wouldn't want to put council in that position. We have had conversations with this particular proponent. They're aware of the situation. They're aware of, I think, some of the criteria around the grant and the timing of the grant, and they're willing to work with us. So for all intents and purposes, we are taking a bit of a pause while we do the application. We believe we've got a great application. We believe in terms of all of Niagara, this is the application that enables housing from a water perspective like no other. And I think as a result of that, we're going to do our best. We're going to continue to show up to Queen's Park and have these types of conversations. It's why we delegate at various committee meetings. And so, again, I think picking up on what Dave said, the timing would be a challenge for us if we were to cancel and reissue, notwithstanding the legal challenges potentially. And so this, the approach we're going to take does give us the ability to apply for the grant. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, but we will do our best on this particular one, and I'm cautiously optimistic.
Appreciate that, but that's exactly what I'm concerned about, is the cautiously optimistic. That right there signals to me that there's not a guarantee. So, in terms of timelines with regards to approving, I'm not saying cancel this, I'm saying defer this. As far as legal ramifications, this tender closed on December the 1st. That's 3 months ago or so. That's quite a long time. So, another month or two, why is it taking it this long for this to come to council now?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So you have a couple of questions I want to unpack there, Councillor. Let me start with the last question, and that is what took so long. I think for the very reasons of this particular housing enabling water fund that was released, probably about 6 weeks ago, if that, we wanted to wait knowing it was coming so that we could equip you with the right answers and have the right conversations. Any longer, waiting another month actually will not give you or give us any more indication of the success of that grant. Waiting another 3 or 4 months possibly may. We risk waiting any longer. There's always that toing and froing that can happen in terms of when we bring a report forward. There's report cycles and so forth. So there's an acceptable industry standard, and then there's, I think what I would classify as probably unacceptable. And so waiting for the sake of waiting to see if we can get some more information in March. If you were telling me wait till May or June, that's a different conversation, and we probably find ourselves outside that window, and I don't think any proponent would be willing to wait there. So we need to go forward with the project, no matter what. I think what council wants us to do is make sure we can offset as much of this as humanly possible through the grant. And that's what we're endeavoring to do. We've got a willing proponent that's willing to work with us, that's willing to, I think, purchase a lot of goods and services, that's willing to not break ground but do the necessary things. I know our staff were in conversations with them as recently as yesterday and today, looking at what are the potential challenges with that. And so I think for, we've got a very good proponent here and one we're looking forward to working with, again, who understands the challenges all councils are facing, and ours is no different in terms of wanting to apply for this grant. So I would suggest to you, I would not be my advice and the advice of staff to defer the project for a month.
Okay, thank you for that response. So another question with respect to this project. The amount, given the significant amount of this project, and what I'm noticing with this tender results is the large variance. I mean, we had the low bid at 14 million and change, and then we had the high bid at 27 and change. Those are some pretty astronomical numbers in my mind. So the question I have is, before we even broke ground, before we even approved the tender, it was almost $500,000 over. That's what we're asking. We're being asked for. What sort of position are we in, given and I can't help but think, like, Councillor Foster talking about, the region stepping in and assisting municipalities. That's why we have a region to work on these big sorts of projects. What sort of capacity do we have to absorb any possible unforeseen troubles that we might occur that say like a 10% or 15% cost overrun? I know that we've implemented a contingency amount, but is that contingency amount enough?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, a couple comments on that. So the contract itself has a contingency allowance within it, in that value you're looking at. I know the project team, sat down and looked at, what would be appropriate to put in there, given the type of work that's occurring. So there is a contingency within that tender amount in that contract. There's been a lot of pre-planning on this project. There's been a lot of investigations ahead of time in terms of geotechnical. We've done a lot of subsurface utility excavations where we actually go and dig up, daylight different utilities to make sure they are where they're supposed to be. So we've done a lot of risk management on the planning of this project to also help mitigate things that may happen during construction. So those would be my comments. If we do run into, issues, we will be reporting to council along the way. If there is something that, is over and above what we're looking at in these estimated costs, but I guess those would be my comments around the contingency in the project and some of the risk management that's been put into this.
Thank you very much. And then third question is with respect to anticipated DC revenue, anticipated funding of this, and timing. I asked a question earlier about the number of residential DC chargeable developments or units that were built, it didn't quite achieve the numbers that we were hoping to. Should we be concerned from a financial position of timing if this project takes longer than anticipated and the collection of those DC funds that we're relying on to fund a good majority of this project? To our Director of Finance.
To the counselor, I mean, it's a similar conversation that we just had about the DCs. There is some uncertainty in terms of the timing. We have a debenture that's already approved and outstanding for this project. So we don't draw on that construction loan until the construction costs start. So, I mean, I would say that we're timing the costs and the DCs being collected on that same basis. And then it comes back down to the same thing we were talking about earlier, where those tools that we use, the reserve fund and the debt, that's how we spread those costs out. So if the development, is taking a little bit longer, then we pull from our reserve funds to pay those debenture principal and interest payments. And then as we collect the DCs, we would use that to pay the remaining portion of the debenture.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response and what you've stated. Thank you.
I'm seeing no other questions. I would like to take the opportunity to ask a few questions, so I'm wondering if Vice Chair Michalak could take the chair for... So, through you, Vice Chair, to either the Director or to Walter, who I know has been heavily involved in the project. So, I think staff has done a remarkable job working with GHD, and I know Jillian is heavily involved in this application, and I think we're all very hopeful, that we're going to be successful, like the CEO has responded and pointed out. This is a huge project. Bringing a number of units and many new residents to Lincoln and to Niagara. But I'm wondering to the Director, and if these questions are premature in terms of where we are with the discussions with the contractor, so be it. But I'm just wondering, we're all hopeful that there's going to be, that carrot at the end of the rainbow and that we get some grant funding. But if, God forbid, we don't, and the prospective contractor that we're going to award this to comes back to us and says, due to delays, we've got some escalation, because of the delay with regards to labor and fuel and any ordinary escalation costs that any contractor across the province would be encumbered with. At what point could we expect a report to come back? And I guess a second part question would be, would anything above and beyond what we're approving tonight in any escalation come through the water reserve, or where would that shortfall come from? So kind of a two-part question to the Director and then maybe to Charlotte to the tail end. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Through you, Chair, to the Councillor, and thanks for your question. So just a little bit of background. So the way the project's been tendered, the contractor or contractors who bid on this were anticipating, starting early this spring, late winter. As we spoke earlier tonight, the grant is definitely something that the town wants to, leverage and do our best to apply for. One of the stipulations with the grant is that actual work can't start until the end of summer, September. As our CAO indicated, we are in discussions with the grant reps in terms of, what can we do in advance of that. So there's a lot of discussions happening around, what we can do in advance and what we can't. In terms of your question with the contractor, some of the good news coming back with our initial discussions, the contractor is willing to wait till, September-ish, which is good news in terms of the contractor working with the town on this. We are anticipating if we're asking the contractor to wait, the contractor could experience some inflationary costs as a result of that. We do want to, be fair with that as well, and we are in those discussions. We don't really know what that looks like, but we definitely, from staff's perspective, we definitely, that's a really, I guess, what's the word? It's definitely worth considering inflationary costs if we're asking the contractor to delay, if we can be successful with this grant, which is a significant grant to the town, up to just over 70% of the contract value or the project value. So if we're successful. So at this point, there's the conversations happening. We don't have a lot of information to share. We can share that as it becomes more available, and we can give a better project update, in the future as that becomes available. But those discussions are happening currently.
Through you, Chair, if I can just add to that, in terms of how it would be funded, the Prudham's water main project is 73% funded from development charges, and so any difference is funded in the same percentage. And then it's basically, as Watson and Associates were talking about tonight, there is a reserve fund adjustment every time you update the study. So we would be funding it on that same percentage if something were to happen. But I know there's been a lot of work that's gone into, and part of this report is really to show council we're trying to be as accurate as we can in terms of the costs that we anticipate. And a lot of work has gone into that. But if there were something unanticipated, it would be funded the same way. So about 25% water main reserve fund, 75% water DCs.
Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, did you log up?
So that's great. I appreciate those responses, and I have no further questions at this point, but I see I don't see anyone else in the queue, so I'm going to allow Councillor McCulloch to do a follow-up question.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I was chairing at the time, so that's why.
You didn't have any question? Okay.
Well, I do. I just, no, I do. As this conversation rolls, and I hear, the contractor is willing to wait till May or till September. I think, without talking to myself, I feel like I'm concerned about the level of funding that we potentially may receive. Director Dave has said possibly 70%, but it could possibly be 5%. And if we approve it now, it's basically at the discretion of the government. And if we wait, maybe it will be more to the 70% mark. And that's where I struggle with this, that we say yes now, we have to settle for whatever we receive. We can't argue. We lose our position at the table in terms of negotiating. That's where I'm hesitant. So those are my comments.
Okay, I'm seeing Mary Easton, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to be empathetic with the councillor's position. There is something that I just want to clarify, and that's I believe that when I was reading the terms of the grant, that the second to last or last comment was in relation to the not starting until the fall. And I read, my interpretation of that was that was the grant terms telling us that this is when that grant was coming out, this is how much time you had to make your application, this is when the grant would be announced, when the grants would close, this is when it would be announced, and you couldn't start until September. I just want to clarify that, because I never understood that was a term or a condition that we had established with the contractors, any of the contractors, in order to define a risk. I just want to make sure that I'm correct.
Mr. CEO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. So I just want to be careful what we're saying publicly versus what we're saying in camera. So let me try to, and I don't believe there's a reason to go in camera, but I want to be careful what we're saying publicly. The reason the proponent is willing to wait till September is because there's an award. And so they're going to stage their other works in order to accommodate that, understanding that as a result of that staging, they've got guaranteed work. Should we say no and then go back out, they may not bid. The bid may come in higher. Councillor Mikulik referenced the fluctuations. And so I think it's one of those things about predictability. It's one of those things about understanding where the contract is at. The waiting till September is something we've negotiated and had conversations with this particular proponent so that it allows us and it allows them to do some of the purchasing of materials, some of the staging that needs to happen, some of those preliminary works to start the project, but not break ground, which is one of those big check marks we need for the application and the grant. And so it is one of those fine lines that we're trying to, I think, walk here so that we keep the municipality and the town in a good position with what we think was a bid that we were happy came, for all intents and purposes, under budget or on budget, versus going back out versus a grant application that totally didn't coincide with every element of the timing we had hoped it did. But we're happy to hear that we're allowed to apply for it and actually structure the agreement the way we have. So I hope I've answered your question, and I think the comment by Councillor Mikulik. Do I have a crystal ball and can predict that if we went back out, it's more or less? No, I don't. That this removes our negotiating powers. Most grants don't work in the way where it's a negotiation. We submit an application. Based on that application, we're given an amount. I understand what the councilor's saying in that, well, we've already awarded it and haven't started, so maybe they're going to give us 50% instead of the full 70%. I think, rest assured, we will advocate and use every sort of government relations tools we have, both internally and externally, here and at Queen's Park, to make sure we maximize that application moving forward. So, Mr. Chair, hopefully that gives you some clarity, Mary Easton.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to ask any more questions because I don't want to walk over that line of what shouldn't be discussed outside of a contract, so that's fine. I believe I'm interpreting that all risks have been covered very extensively in the discussion and preparation for this, and I agree with the comments that the CEO just made in terms of how grants are issued, and I'll be voting for the motion. We need to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't want to speak on behalf of staff, but I have been, speaking as chair. I've been speaking with our staff, since we came back from Roma, and I think we are very fortunate that our low bidder is a contractor that works all across Ontario. He's not specific to the GTA. He does a lot of work in this sector, and I believe he is also dealing with the same situation with other municipalities. So he is actually a proponent understanding that, the pressures that municipalities are being put under as he's talking to other municipalities. So I believe through some of the associations, we have some advocacy happening at the same time. So I think we're in a good situation that way, that we're dealing with someone that has a widespread and a wide swath when it comes to dealing with contractors and dealing with municipalities. So I see no further questions at this point. So being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer to receive and file report PW-0224 regarding the Prudhome's Water Main Upgrade Project tender results, and approve the contract award for the Prudhome's Water Main Upgrade Project in the amount of $14,111,496.24 plus HST, as outlined in this report, to Earth Boring Company Limited, and approve GHD to be retained to provide contract administration and inspection services as outlined in this report, and approve a budget adjustment to the Prudhome's Water Main Upgrade Project in the amount of $479,510, financed 73% by the Development Charge Reserve Fund and 27% by the Water Main Reserve Fund. And I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. Councillor Rajima?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'll close that vote. And that motion carries. Thank you.
We will now consider report PW-01-24, the Public Works Update Report. I believe everyone should have in front of them, except maybe the councillors that are obviously remote, have the Public Works Project Update Report Q4 2023. So do members of committee have any questions? Councillor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunei. I just saw it and I was like, uh-oh. I didn't come up, it's Councillor Russell. I don't really have any questions, but I just want to give a shout out to staff. This is a fantastic publication. It helps me all the time, and I keep it very handy so I know where it is. And these are questions that a lot of residents tend to ask questions about Public Works and what's happening and what's going on in this area. And this is just fantastic, and I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to say thank you to staff for all this hard work. It takes a lot of work to put that together, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Pachariva?
Thank you, Chair Brunei, and through you to Director Graham. David, thank you for this report. This is one of my favorites. Just a question with respect to Project 08, Durham Road reconstruction. You've seen the online chatter about Ontario Street and knowing that project will take a year. And we had talked previously about possibly doing Lincoln before Durham. And I emphatically said that we should do Durham first because it's a shorter run. And now knowing that Corneefs and are going to be starting their work with the extension of the water main in the next week or two, might this be a better project to accelerate? And then if we do that, then that will give a brand new access to town, to the QEW, and might relieve a lot of pressure off of Ontario Street. And then residents will begin to use this route and maybe adopt it as their means to travel in and out of town. What are your thoughts?
Director Graham?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, and great feedback back on that, councillor. Staff and the project team are kind of thinking in those lines as well. If committee will recall, the Durham Road project has been really subject to the business owners at the end of Durham Road extending their water main, and there's been a lot of ongoing issues to work through in terms of the CN crossing and things like that, which has kind of had that work on and off. But some good news is, as Councillor Pachariva was saying, the business owners have made really good progress with CN. They have all the CN approvals. They have a contractor lined up. And we can expect that work to start very soon. There's already some pre-work happening out there on Durham Road to do the water main crossing under the CN tracks. And so that's what we are looking at in terms of the road project, is to, because it's ready to go from our perspective. So we are looking at the possibility of following the water main work with our road project, if that all aligns and favorable bid results and everything else come in. But we are looking at trying to time that work to minimize the disruption on Durham Road. That way the work can kind of be done sort of all at the same time or after each other. And the actual construction work on Durham Road is not a significant duration of work, so we should be able to get the road back open and in a reasonable amount of time. So we are looking at that, Councillor, and committee, and we will report more on that as time goes on, but we are looking at that.
And Councillor Pachariva?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bernay. Director Graham, that's excellent news, because that would alleviate any potential increase in cost to the business owners for any remediation, is that we can come right in after the project is done and continue on and limit the disruption. And rather than have Lincoln and Ontario Street, two thoroughfares side by side undergoing disruption at the same time. So I think that's a terrific idea, and thank you for facilitating. Look forward to the tender results. Thank you, Chair Bernay.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mikulak?
Thank you very much, Chair Brune. Through you to Director Dave. With regards to Project 1 on the transportation environmental safety, King Street improvements, it says public engagement and stakeholder consultation 2024, tender project 2025, detailed design 2024. Can you tell me what that engagement's going to look like? How is that going to occur, and when roughly in 2024 you think that might happen? Just for the residents of Vineland that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I'll make a couple comments, and I'm going to ask Mr. Dubauer maybe to provide any more detail. We don't have the details of that from the region, but I know there's a commitment from the region to engage with the public, share the design plans on King Street, show people what's coming with that project. They are planning to tender it the following year. So I don't have any more details, but maybe Walter might have something to share.
Thanks, Dave. Through you, Chair. Yes, the region is committed to engaging with the public and council this year, probably later in the fall. I can tell you that the design is moving really well right now. And the last time we spoke, we have monthly meetings on the project. They are fully intending on tendering this project spring of 2025. So in terms of public outreach, I would say we would hold a traditional public meeting somewhere in Vineland, so the public could come out and take a look at the plans and provide their comments.
Thank you very much. And that's exactly what I wanted to hear. We would have the meeting somewhere in Vineland, not Beamsville or somewhere out of the area. And the other thing, I want to make sure that the public has sufficient notice of this, of this initiative and what's occurring or slated to occur. And also, hold the region, to task on not pushing this off another year. the way it has probably since 2021 or 22. 2021, 22, so that's why I'm bringing this up now. And I'd also like to thank the both of you for always putting yourselves available to myself or Councillor Chair Brunet to discuss these sorts of things. And when we schedule a meeting, an hour isn't enough, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers to receive and file PW-01-24 regarding the Public Works Update Report Q4 2023 and presentation as Appendix A. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Rajima?
In favor, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Devan. Confidential items, we have no confidential items this evening. Committee remarks, do we have any committee remarks? Seeing none, there being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 8:30.